what I think right now would make sense for me is if I continue to talk a little bit more about this work, it will lead kind of naturally to how I am also, let's say, framing resilience around collapse. Personally, for me and for my family, in my talks with my wife, with my daughters, because this connects to not only the work I do, I think how does it make sense to stay alive and to be on this planet in our present context doing what? And I think finding meaning is a very important aspect of how we can be resilient and how we can continue to find a way to move forward. Even I was going to say in spite of, but I think what I mean to say is more, even with what everything that is happening in what we call collapse.
Yeah. I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. In today's guest, Mariano Pedroza, we find an exemplar of so many things we talk about on this channel: self-regulation, co-regulation, and advanced practices. Mariano brings this to his life, his family, and his work with other people around the world. Welcome, Mariano Pedroza. Hi there, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast. And this will be yet another example of a podcast interview that is a perfect fit for not only the Poetry of Predicament, which is, of course, the YouTube channel that supports the work of livingresilience.net, the website, and all the stuff we do, but also a special kind of sister podcast and curated content that can be found not on YouTube, but on the website itself, on the programs page, which is called Deep Academy on livingresilience.net. And that sister podcast, that set of curated content, is something that we came up with early last year in 2019 that is meant to be a place where kind of a specialized population in the planet get to find some safety, some content that is meant to be as useful as possible in their particular brand of challenge in facing the world that we are all in today. The podcast is called Take My Hand, a conscious parenting in a time of stolen dreams. And as the name obviously implies, it's for people who are both collapse aware and parents, which if you're not a parent in these times, in my experience, which I am not, by the way, but my many conversations with parents and children for this series has shown me that there are unique challenges. It's already challenging enough to be collapse aware in these times and to try and speak with other people who are not that way, who are in their own view of the world that does not include the fact that we are in quite obvious, from our perspective, examples of human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems. And again, while that is challenging enough, just being a person with that framing, that perspective about our world, it is all the more challenging to be a parent and carrying that frame, that perspective. Needless to say, the average parent in this world, the last thing they want to do is pass on to their child in any way the notion that they will not, their children will not be enjoying an even more abundant lifestyle than they have in their lifetime. So unique challenges all the way around. Today's guest is a remarkable person that I just literally bumped into on a Zoom call last week. I was thrilled to have him on both podcasts, the Poetry of Predicament and the Take My Hand, Conscious Parenting in a Time of Stolen Dreams podcast that's available again on the website. I hope you'll find, whether you're a parent or not, I hope you'll be watching this for a remarkable example of someone who has really been in a lifelong deep dive into the kinds of what I might call advanced practices that are exactly called for now for anyone who wants to build their capacity to be present in the face of larger and larger stressors, which seem imminent, both present now and more coming soon. So Mariano Pedroza is the person that I'm interviewing in this episode. I hope you will find his story and his practice that he offers counseling and coaching to clients around the world from where he lives now in Thailand. We'll hear quite a bit about his story, what got him to the level of expertise, the breadth and depth of his practices, and the services that he brings to other people. It's an extraordinary story, and I find him to be one of the strongest exemplars of someone who has seriously taken on these advanced practices and somehow knew to do that from a very early age. It's a remarkable story, and one that, if we let it be, could be quite inspiring to any of us. Taking even a small slice of his story and putting it into place, into practices in our own lives. I know that I've learned a tremendous amount from him just by sitting in this interview myself. So I hope you enjoy, and thanks so much again for watching the Poetry of Predicament. And if you haven't checked out the various offerings on the programs page on the website of livingresilience.net, I hope you do so. Please sign up. This particular offering of the Take My Hand podcast interviews and curated content, like all the offerings there, are offered in a spirit of gift economy. So please come in, check it out. Hopefully you'll find a tremendous amount of value. And if you would like to deepen your engagement with that and become part of a way of communicating with one another and meeting up from time to time in a sense of community of practice for these advanced practices, well, come on in. It'll be great to have you. All right, enjoy today's interview with Mariano Pedroza. And knowing that what I believe we're headed to is a conversation of really what it's like to be a human being who is aware of the human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems. And then also, importantly, being a parent with that same knowledge. And so if you could just introduce yourself a little bit about, you know, what history brought you to this place.
Okay. Yeah, and I think if when you say talk a little bit about myself, I think a little bit of my history will connect to this theme, because I've went through some quite deep challenges in different moments in my life where it felt like my world was collapsing. So in a sense, it was not like now we have this global perspective of this collective collapse, but this experience of feeling that our world is collapsing, I think, is common to most human beings in different moments in life. So my name is Mariano, and in different countries, different languages, this can acquire different pronunciations, and I'm fine with it. And I come originally from Brazil. I was born in the capital, Brasilia, in 1966, during a military dictatorship there, which already is part of, I would say, meaningful in my life, that my mother was an activist at the time. So I was 9 years old, we fled to Africa, and we lived for an average 3 years in each country, because my parents were hired by contract by the UN, United Nations, as consultants. My mother is an educator, my father an architect. So we would live 3 years in one place. At the time, we did not have internet connection, Facebook, Instagram, emails. So I was 9 years old when this started. It's really leaving your friends behind. Your world literally kind of collapses, because for children, especially adolescents, belonging, having this network is really vital. So I would rebuild, and every 3 years kind of lose it all again and then rebuild. So reconnecting, this has taught me a lot about, well, it has taught many things. There's always, and we will talk about this in this conversation about awareness of the collapse. There is always a dark side or a shadow side to it, and the possibility of transformation in a bright side, let's say a luminous side to these experiences. It was like that in these changes that I went through. I had to go through losses, losing friends, losing connection with people, losing whatever safety I had built in terms of adapting to school and to a routine, and having to start over somewhere else. So it was kind of a repeated experience of losing and rebuilding, losing, rebuilding. But it has had many also it brought many beautiful things in terms of meeting friends. Some of them I reconnected after the event of the internet. I found some of them on Facebook and could reconnect. But learning languages, learning about different cultures was some of the things I gained also with these experiences. I did live in the United States. I went to study at Berklee College of Music in Boston for 4 years, and I was 1 year in LA. That's where I learned English, actually. and then went back to Brazil. I was 22. I was at the time reading all the books of Carlos Castaneda, was very much into wanting to understand expanded states of consciousness and spirituality and all these things. But I went straight into deep therapeutic processes because I felt very confused about who I was, what I was doing on this planet, what I was supposed to do professionally, and how I was going to move on with my life, my identity, all of these things. So I went into psychotherapy not to become a therapist, but more to deal with my own confusion and my own issues. But ended up doing so much of it. And after a while, it's participating in trainings. Initially, the idea was just to continue to deepen my own process. So I met great teachers, usually founders of methods that are recognized in the field. So I studied with Dr. John Pierrakos, who co-founded bioenergetics with Alexander Lowen and then created core energetics. For 10 years, it was a 5-year training, and then we would, I became translator, so I took the training more than once. Bioenergetics. So I had this, I started practicing clinically. And after some years, I felt that this individual work, this individual setting, or even protected groups of people who could pay for psychotherapy, was leaving out a big part of the reality or the context in which I was inserted. In Brasilia, where I lived, there was an expansion, as it happened in most big cities in Brazil. People migrating to try to escape poverty and establishing themselves in the outskirts of the big city in the best way they can, but without access to many of the public services and infrastructure. So creating these slums or favelas, as we call them, and then trying to find a way to survive in the city. And I felt, okay, how do I see fear? You could feel as social violence increased, that fear increases. And it's a feedback loop. The more we have fear, the more we have social violence. So the walls becoming bigger, electrified kind of protections around the houses, dogs. I mean, a process of fear-based process of trying to protect yourself from, I mean, things that also have, it exists and people want to feel safe, I understand. But my inner feeling was, how can I move towards these neighborhoods? And how can I didn't want to do assistentialist work, take something to give something to them in terms of food, but how can I use my knowledge? How can I use the work I use in the office in those contexts was a challenge for me because I didn't know how. So another great teacher I studied with is called Dr. Adalberto Mejia. He's a psychiatrist, anthropologist, theologian. He came from a challenging context in northeast of Brazil, and he had the opportunity to study. So first he was going to become a priest, but he ended up studying medicine and psychiatry, and then going back to his homeland, trying to, in that cultural context, apply what he had learned in European universities. He felt there was a discrepancy and that he needed to build bridges. So his PhD was in anthropology of mental health. And he developed in a favela favela. A very, well, first it was very pragmatic. It was developed by trying, so it was developed in a very empirical manner. He started going there once a week to meet with usually large numbers of people who were waiting for a doctor to talk about their issues or problems. And he felt he had no way of working in that context with what he learned at the university. So he needed to develop something with them. And he started filming, going there once a week and filming it. And from that, he could develop a method that had beginning, middle, end, and it was an intervention that could function in that context. And because he's a professor at the university, he could also develop a theory and the theoretical pillars of this method, which are very useful for me nowadays, whether I'm working with integrative community therapy or in other methods. But whenever I work in community contexts, this paradigm, these theoretical pillars kind of form a paradigm that is very useful to insert yourself and be able to work and dialogue in different community contexts.
Is there a name for that particular body of work? And would you mind saying the author again, or the name of the?
Yeah. The founder of the method is called he's Adalberto, so Adalberto, Adalberto. Barreto, Barreto. And the full name of this work is called Systemic Integrative Community Therapy. There isn't a lot in English about it, although there's more and more articles and interviews. His book is being translated into English, but it's in French and it's mostly in Portuguese. The websites are all in Portuguese.
So it's not in English yet?
No.
Okay.
No, the website, I believe soon there will be websites in English as well. I'm trying to build one for myself, so where I can at least explain what it is about. Maybe you asked me a simple question and I'm taking a long time to make all these connections, but it all connects to now how I am facing the reality we are facing is connected to this whole history. And I think it will be easier for me to talk about it if I have this background.
Yeah.
So just to finish it, I then became interested in how I could use the body-oriented psychotherapy work within this systemic community approach. And so I started learning a lot about trauma and somatic experiencing, tension releasing exercises, and psychotraumatology based on the body, the resources, and the system. So different methodologies that helped me to bridge the work I was doing clinically with the work I was doing in communities. And now recently I just moved to Thailand a year and a half ago. I again left Brazil. I have my 14-year-old daughter with me. I am married, a father of 2 daughters. One is in Argentina, she's 19, and the other one is 14 and is here with us, my wife and I. And again, this is kind of one of these loops in the spiral where again, there is sort of a military dictatorship now in Brazil, which is not openly, at least so far, it's not like openly declared, but in practice. That's what we are going through, and leaving the country again. So for me, it's really going back and now taking my daughter out of her context. And with these technologies now, it's a different experience because she stays connected.
Mm-hmm.
But then we have to deal with, online time. Okay, so I think you had asked me to talk a little bit about me and the work I do. And I think I extended myself quite a bit, but this is what I can say as a context.
Yeah, well, I absolutely appreciate it. As you, I'm sure, well know, the USA, even in academic circles, there's such a prejudice, there's such a bias toward all things American, that we really are the ones that are important. We have all the experts and so on. And I think you've done a really great job of kind of peeling back to a far more true layer for this conversation. I think there's no more important foundation layer that you could have told us about, because we are utterly ignorant of collapse because of our, says me, this is just my perspective, is that we have kept ourselves so completely delusional in the myth of infinite growth on a finite planet and our domination within that, and the exceptionalism within that we literally cannot see collapse. We cannot see the pain we inflict and so on. And we also cannot see the immense wisdom, out of lived experience, not to mention academic experience and so on, of other people in other lands. We just don't see it. So I absolutely appreciate it. I've learned so much just in your introduction. So that was not too long at all from my perspective, and I really appreciate it. And please continue to take it wherever you might like to go.
Okay, thank you for that. I will tend to speak freely when you ask me a question, and if I'm going far, if I'm moving away from the subject or anything, please feel free to just interrupt me, ask me, or bring me back.
Okay. Okay. Well, sounds like you're kind of pausing for maybe a prompt or a question.
Yeah, I can continue to talk more. I mean, I was kind of waiting for a prompt or a question. I don't know if you go in any specific direction, or if I can just continue to reflect or to share. Or
yeah. Well, I think you've set a really strong foundation, and I'm curious about two major things. One is your experience of yourself and your family, and just what it's like to be as aware as you are individually and collectively as your family unit, and facing what we're all now facing. So that's really I would call that the central theme. But I'm also so very curious about the work that you've been describing, that you've really very intentionally carved out over many chapters of your life. And it sounds like something, I am not a therapist, but I've been involved with very deep training and personal development work, including some shamanic and energetic work for decades. And I've landed in a place that is not at all academically founded as yours is, but very similar emphasis, like, you know, to have these community, to be able to do something at scale instead of the individual person. It would just, that's why I didn't go into therapy as a practitioner, because it just seemed like this is for rich people. This is for people who have the time and space and luxury and privilege of being able to follow some very long thread of possible healing and so on. And I heard you address so many of these pieces that have come to me in a different way over time. So, so this is a whole separate piece that I would love to hear about, especially if you've integrated that into your own practice and your own work with people as well. Those would be two directions that I would love to hear about. And if one of them is stronger than the other, please take your pick and off we go.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And thank you for giving me so much flexibility and space to kind of flow in this with you. So what I think right now would make sense for me is if I continue to talk a little bit more about this work, it will lead kind of naturally to how I am also, let's say, framing resilience around collapse. Personally, for me and for my family, in my talks with my wife, with my daughters, because this connects to not only the work I do, I think how does it make sense to stay alive and to be on this planet in our present context, doing what? And I think finding meaning is a very important aspect of how we can be resilient and how we can continue to find a way to move forward. Even I was going to say in spite of, but I think what I mean to say is more, even with what everything that is happening in what we call collapse. So, yeah, you mentioned something important, and it's true in shamanic work. The community is a very important aspect, and it's this field that is created, and it's not so individualized like psychotherapy or individual clinical work. Is more this perspective of this, what we could call a community body, or when we gather together to talk about us, we create this we space where all these possible interconnections and the weaving of the stories can lead to increased awareness and increased connection, solidarity, and therefore healing out of that. So I learned a great deal about this doing integrative community therapy work, which I will, if you allow me, just explain a little bit about what is the purpose of it and how we make it happen in practical terms. So the idea, it's not a psychotherapy. We say that. We are not there to analyze, and we are not there to actually solve problems. That's very interesting. We are there to create a space and to facilitate a space where people can share, identifying from a place of empathy, resonance, from a place of non-judgment, and can just share authentically what they are going through. So in this context, you will find a lot of challenges, difficulties, painful stories. And then we have a focus on, and what helps you to cope with it, what helps you to overcome it. So the group will also share their wisdom that comes from life experience. Like you said, the academy or universities are a wonderful source of knowledge, but it's not the only source of knowledge. And when people share incredible stories of how they managed to move through certain challenges in life, we get so much wisdom and learning out of it. But what happens is it creates networks of solidarity within the community, people identifying with each other, connecting at a deeper level, at a more truthful level, and then just feeling that they belong. And this feeling of belonging is like regenerating a social tissue. Out of that, creative solutions come from the group, not brought from outside by a specialist. If people feel safer together, feel closer, that they are not now gossiping about each other because the information has been socialized, let's say. I understand your pain and I also have my pain. And now we can also talk about what we do to overcome our challenges. This creates a very strong field for people to grow out of their experiences and of their painful experiences and of their challenges in a way that is constructive and not destructive. Or it generates more integration and more coherence, more cohesiveness in the social tissue. And around this, we can offer many other helpful tools. So you can offer what we call integrative health practices, and then you can offer body work, or you can offer ways to release tension, reduce the levels of stress, and promote health from within. Okay, so yeah, talking about my family and me personally, and how we are experiencing the present historical moment we are going through, I will start personally. Like I said in the beginning, feeling that my world collapses and then rebuilding it has been a recurring experience, and has kind of allowed me to connect with a trust. I feel it's very important. I think a basic word for me when I think of this, when I think of a collapse and even potential extinction, I feel it's very important to have some kind of balance. So personally, connecting with everything I can feel grateful for is a way for me to promote balance and to not become just horrified and depressed and afraid. And I do realistically, I mean, very objectively, have many beautiful things that I can be grateful for and that I can just connect with. So connecting with resources, which is the same thing we do in trauma therapy. Before you go into anything traumatic or the core of the trauma, you must make sure the person has developed enough resources to be able to deal with that kind of pain and chaos, emotional arousal and dysregulation. So So that's one thing that I work with when I'm working with other people and helping them to integrate traumatic experiences. I am doing that in the process, helping people to build resources so that they can actually integrate the pain and the shocking experiences they went through. And this kind of applies to my own personal life and with my family, you know, with my daughters, my wife. When this subject arises, um, being a parent in this time is really challenging. See, a part of me would say, okay, I can go through anything. I don't care what happens to me. I just don't want to watch my daughter go through it. So that's one part of me that would like reality to be different. because especially see but I know this is um, um, not a possibility. They are here on this planet, and we need to talk about these things because they bring it up as well, and because the last thing I would want them to think is that I don't care about what's going on. If we don't even mention it, we don't talk about the genocide that is going on in Brazil. It's amazing, these historical processes, because everything is back. It's like all the unhealed wounds of the past come and they are alive again. So slavery, the issue with the original peoples of Brazil that were decimated to a great part, and now they are being threatened again and their lands being taken away again, like this cycle repeating. It's very painful to watch that. I will share you something more intimate. My daughter, and she was 13 then, the one that is here with us, the night of the elections in Brazil, which were, I mean, it's a farce, but that we had the result of the elections and that Bolsonaro was elected. She's 13, so I just saw her go into her room alone. And then I saw that she was sad and I went after her. And then I said, how are you feeling? And she didn't want to talk. And I said, you're sad, huh? And she said, yes. And then I said, yeah, this also goes away. It will last for a while. I'm also very sad that this is happening, but this is how it is. And then she started weeping and crying. And she said, what is going to happen to the Indians? That's what because he was already talking about taking their lands. So her heart was with them. Somehow she had this deep identification, which I also understand as a deep identification with nature and with our planet, with our ecosystem, with Mother Earth, and just feeling the pain of what is happening, because it's a very painful context. So when these things come up like that, it's very important to also bring awareness to resources, I think. And I said, yes. And then, well, she knows her grandmother was an activist. We talked about Malala in that moment and said, do you know what happened to her? She didn't know exactly. I said, they shot her in the head because she was advocating for education for women, and because she refused to stop going to school and she wanted to learn. And what happened then was she became even stronger out of that. So kind of giving that perspective that, yeah, we have challenges and we are going through very difficult situations and we have possibilities. So I tend to tell them, yeah, you have a beautiful light and the world needs your light. Because, see, as a father, if I think of the statistics in terms of suicidal amongst adolescents in Brazil, and I think not only in Brazil, I don't think it's exclusive in Brazil, but the rates of depression, the rates of suicide and mental health issues amongst children and adolescents has increased enormously. And I feel it's so important to bring some perspective that is meaningful and real, not to kind of try to paint reality in pink and say that everything is all right.
Yeah.
Not denying the pain of it, but also saying, yeah, we are creative beings and we are going to find creative ways to contribute in the way we can. They ask me a lot about the work I do, and I think it is a source of nourishment, nurturing for their own souls when they think of that, and when they see, and they have already been to communities with me, and they see the pictures and the videos, and they hear about the work, then it gives them also this sensation that, okay, yeah, there are good things that we can be doing, even in these times that are so difficult. Yeah. There are meaningful things that can be happening and that we can engage with.
So if I could, I'd love to just go down that path just a little bit further, if it's okay. First, it just warms my heart to hear you describe your work, and also how effortlessly you have had that also blend in with your family fabric as well. And it's just inspiring and clear. I get it. It's deeply affirming for me to hear what you've woven into your practice and into your life. And I'm curious, it seems like you as an adult, and particularly with the depth you've lived since very young, you have a strong spiritual core that seems to have landed very early at a place of being able to let go of the typical agenda, the personality and agenda that happens in the business as usual world, that pumps us forward in the business as usual world. And I'm curious if your daughters also have kind of picked that up from you, of being able to somehow let that go off to the side, instead of, how the peer pressure or peer networking, whatever it is that kids have growing up, oftentimes that can be not such a good influence, because it can be that personality based, that business as usual based way of forming self and way of engaging with life. And what I hear you describing is that it sounds like your daughters have kind of adopted that from you, that ability to set aside that business as usual way of being, and to orient in a way that is, and excuse me, I'm just really sharing from my own experience, trying to put it into words, that there's an orientation towards something far larger than my own self. And that means letting go of an agenda, even the most important, seemingly important agendas of, we need to fix this, or those are the bad people, and these are the good people, and we need to do the good thing or something. it seems like what you're describing is really letting go of many of those structures, and what's then present is a sense, is a palpable presence that different traditions have different names for it, but there is something so spiritually rooted in what I think I'm hearing you describe. So I'm just curious, is that remotely close to how you see it yourself? And do you see those same roots in your daughters?
Okay. Yeah, yeah. This, I mean, um, I this is very much connected to the way I live my life and kind of orient myself towards what I'm going to do and how I choose to live. Sometimes I feel a little irresponsible in terms of not planning enough, not having saved enough, not having enough safety for my own family, you know, because I take risks and moving to another country and sometimes being in very vulnerable situations, even financially, and kind of having to count on trust and faith almost for a while. You know, we hope everything is going to work out. We hope everything is going to be all right, and to move on without becoming too concerned. But yes, I think you are touching something that is, in my view, very central and very important in terms of resilience and in terms of choosing the path we follow, which is a worldview and a perspective that allows enough fluidity, flexibility, and connection to what is essential. Because I think this is what is so helpful in this moment is remaining connected to what is really essential and remaining flexible to be able to flow with this river that we cannot predict. Nowadays, it has become so difficult to make plans. You know, I train people in other countries. Well, the training modules have been canceled. People say, okay, we will have module 3 in July. I say, well, do you know? I don't know. We don't know. So it has become so, it's not, I don't think it's new, you know, that we are not in control of all these dates and this agenda. We just had a stronger illusion that we were in control. But now it has become so obvious that we are not in control. We can only navigate, and we have some options in this river that is much bigger than us, and the current is pulling one way. And yes, some things are very helpful. So what you are asking connects with spirituality, with ethics, with core values, and I think core human values, believing in the human being and connecting with the heart and opening ourselves to connect with others. And yes, I can see, I am sure my daughters have picked up a lot of that, and they bring that with them. And I can just see, my oldest is 19. She chose to go to Argentina to study psychology, and she's already interested in all of this, how human beings function, how they think and how they feel and why. And I must say, we had help. This famous saying that it takes a village to educate a child. I think that's one of the difficulties in when we create such an individualistic society and so competitive, where we are working almost against each other because there isn't enough room for everybody, so we must compete. And the families have lost, so parents have lost this possibility of, okay, I am working now, but I know my children are in good hands and that there are other safe adults around them that are good references. So I must say one thing that for us was very helpful was the school they went to in Brazil, and before we moved here was a Waldorf school, which had a lot of emphasis on engaging the parents in the educational process, in school activities, which led to a lot of connection amongst different families. And they made a lot of friends in a network where we knew the parents, we knew, and we shared, no, there were differences and there was a lot of diversity in this, but there was also important references that we shared in terms of how to educate children to be blossoming human beings and not future just competitors and successful professionals that will make a lot of money, but that they are connected to their hearts, they are connected to their soul, that they see the world in a way that whatever they choose to study, whether they will make a lot of money or not, that's not the priority. The priority is that they feel more connected to to their true nature and to who they truly are. So I must say it was very helpful to have teachers we could talk to at school about issues that were going on at home, and also they felt things at school, they would talk to us and other families, to have also this network of connection. Really, I think that's either we learn that now or we are going to disappear as a species, that we are connected.
Yeah.
And that we cannot just thrive individually and owning things, but that we belong to each other and that we are connected. And interconnection, I think, is now well, it is always an important part of how reality is, but now the awareness of it and transformation based on not feeling separate, but feeling connected and part of humanity and part of nature and part of the planet. Yeah. And part of this balance, I think, is very central to how this whole thing is going to unfold.
Yeah. I'm curious if I could just shift our direction a little bit. In one part of, actually in much of what you've already shared with us in this time, you've mentioned time and again the word resources and also resilience. And just a brief bit about how I got to where I'm involved in this work is which is to offer support and resources to people who are facing consciously facing human-caused collapse of Earth and human systems. I was looking around while I was researching, writing my own book, which is called The Impossible Conversation. I wanted to know who else was doing some work at scale that spoke the same kind of language that you've been using. Resourcing at an extraordinary level, and what is resilience, and how is it usually used as a term, term of art, or if you will. And so I found for the kind of basic level, most effectively, like when professionals go in or volunteers go in to support people who have just had their entire city blown away by a hurricane. And so if people are now sleeping in a gymnasium and their life is shattered, these people can go in and offer something like a mental health first aid, like a resilience training at the most basic level, so that they can self-regulate a little bit, so they can return to a sense of connection. And as you've said time and again, accessing resources that they already have, but in that shattering experience, they lose track, they lose connection.
Yeah,
And so the main kind of source for that kind of information and that kind of methodology was a woman named Elaine Miller Karras and her Trauma Resource Institute. And they indeed have trained up thousands of people around the world to do just that kind of work, to go in and help people at that kind of first aid level to reconnect with resources. But there's another guy, slightly different, what his work was about. And that his work was longer term. It was after the first aid. So building a sense of community and resilience over time. His work is called transformational resilience. There's a guy named Bob Doppelt, and I'm curious if you've heard of Bob.
No, I haven't heard of him.
Okay. It's remarkable how many of the pieces that you've been sharing are very similar to ways that he's expressed similar topics about resourcing, about resilience, and the difference that he is carved out between, if a simple definition of resilience could be, in life, from time to time, we get knocked down by something. Some experience knocks us down, so to speak. And a simple way to describe resilience would be, how able are we to get back up? Oversimplified, but it works. The idea of transformational resilience is, he starts by predicting, and this is, I don't know, his book is at least 5 years old. I'm thinking more like 7 or 8 years old now. And in his book, he was predicting what we're used to in the USA in particular is we might have a hurricane in an area. And then, yes, of course, we have to rebuild, and it's tragic and so on. But we tend to be used to a few years of building back before the next thing might happen. And what he was predicting was that, no, that's not likely to continue. We're going to have one thing after the other, maybe 2 or 3 things happening at the same time. And so this transformational resilience, how he defines it, is instead of just surviving or enduring one powerful event, impactful event, that and so in not just enduring or surviving, but what if it were possible to grow and to learn and possibly even thrive in the midst of any number of collapse or disaster events. And I kind of grew up in the transformational training business, and it was a serious thing to use the word transformation. Now, of course, we live in a world where you can buy a pair of socks that transform your life. So it's a little different, but I think you and I are both talking about a very different thing, about truly transformation and truly resilience at that level of again, not just enduring or surviving, but possibly even thriving in the middle of a disaster or a large scale stressor of some kind. I'm curious if that sparks you to say or share anything.
Oh, yes, sure. I mean, learning from these experiences is part of what I call resilience. So it would even be unfair to go through a very difficult, challenging experience and to, in the end, become dysregulated and to, in the end, just go back to being my old self and not getting anything out of all these difficulties I went through. It's only fair that when I come out wiser than I was before. Mm-hmm. Because I have learned things in the process of dealing with these difficulties that have made me grow as a human being. And this is what I call resilience. Because resilience, when we refer where it originally comes from, physics and the capacity material has to like bounce back. But for human beings, it's not just bouncing back. It's bouncing forward, I would say. Mm-hmm. Bouncing, like, yeah, I get my regulation back, or I get my cohesiveness back. But there were learnings, and now I know more, and I know better. So that's a very important thing, and I thank you for bringing that, the transformational aspect, and not only at an individual level, as a community, because also often in these contexts, people might then join together and get to know each other in ways they didn't know before, and develop ways of organizing themselves for possible future events, and learn ways of functioning as a network and as a community that were not set, were not there before. So this is the let's say the hopeful direction, is if we can grow out of these experiences.
Mariano, I'm curious if I could, may I shift our direction again?
Sure.
Because I'm thinking we're on the closing edge of our conversation time for this particular interview, but I'm curious if you would share a bit about when you and I say the words collapse aware, and we're talking about really at a global level now, not just Brazil 2 years, 10 years, 20 years ago, but really global level now. I'm curious if you could share, what are you seeing when you say the word either current or imminent collapse of systems, be they earth systems or human systems? I'm curious what you are seeing and what most concerns you.
Okay, I will do my best to answer that with, what I know and what I don't know, what I just feel or intuitively get out of it. I think anyone who says, I absolutely know how this is going to happen, not trustworthy. Because we all have at least I will speak for myself, a good level of not knowing. But it's very, very clear that there is a lot of unbalance, and that we are faced with a, okay, I must say, non-linear process, but of intensification of catastrophes, disasters, ecological, social collapse. What is happening in Brazil is a localized example of what is happening worldwide. And I mean, if we hear what serious scientists are saying about climate change, and if I think Jem Bendo offered us a wonderful paper and information about this, with sources where we can go to and have an idea of what's already going on, that I truly see very intense transformation in the sense, but intense transformation meaning intense challenges and difficulties and chaos and disruption of established structures. I see that this, like I said in the beginning, there will be, and there is always, a shadow side to it. So I can talk about horrible things that I can envision when people are buying weapons to protect themselves and like becoming ready for kind of a survival war and against other human beings. I will be the last one standing, me and the cockroaches.
Yeah.
So finding bunkers and I think, yeah, so the intensification of earthquakes and tsunamis and hurricanes, this is already happening. So I see a lot of that as inevitable right now. Several scientists are saying we have gone beyond the point of no return, right? That it's already on the verge of very intense things that we can expect to happen. And on the bright side, let's say, I really cannot envision a really true transformation with the structures we had set up in place politically, our democracy, and like we will vote for the right politicians and everything will be all right. I don't think true transformation or deep transformation can come out of that. So in a sense, there is even almost a relief that, okay, now it's the real deal. Now let's see what's real, what's not real. And I don't know in terms of time, if, you know, it could happen. I was not expecting COVID this year, and I don't know what's gonna happen next year or maybe 10 years from now. But I do think that we are living very intense transformational, intense times with possibilities of very deep transformation. And I say possibilities because how we are aware of it will make an absolute difference in terms of if we learn from it or if we just suffer it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. Excuse me.
One more thing, in the end, I mean, I never had the expectation of avoiding death. You know, death is, if there is one thing we can predict, is that we are going to die at some point. Yeah. This is one thing we know. So if we start with that, I'll say, okay, then how is it worth to be living the time I have here with everything that is happening, because death is part of it. Death, we can count on that. That's one of the sure things that we can count on. And I'm glad, it's not a bad thing. I never intended, I want to live forever in this body. And so it's just learning to die before we die. I like very much this, I know it's in different traditions, said it in different ways, that we die every day. So dying for what I was before, to be able to truly grow, and yeah, that's the only way to grow spiritually, if I'm ready to die.
Seems like that's could be considered one of the important exercises, if you will, in the gym of life for more resilience. The more I can die a little bit each day, the more resilient I will tend to be.
Yeah, and a funny paradox with it is often, especially working with the body sometimes, because I often say I will just help the body to feel more alive and energize the body. And then there is also the fear of feeling too alive, to truly feeling life. So this paradox, we are afraid of death because we are afraid of being too alive. So it's but we are dealing with that, life and death. I think this theme of the collapse, and even globally, leads us to talk about, are we going to be extinct as a species? Are we going to die as a species? And if that is so, then what makes sense right now? And maybe we will not be extinct. We will be deeply transformed in what comes next. We don't know.
Yeah. Mariano, it's just been an absolute delight and educational opportunity, rich experiential opportunity for me to meet you. And I'm just so glad that I put out the invitation to you and that you accepted to be able to have some conversation about primarily what is it to be a parent in these times. And, little did I know what else I was bringing in by inviting you here. I am thrilled. I just feel like I've just had a remarkable exposure to so much wisdom and experience, and interestingly enough, one of the most important pieces that I got was the something spurred you on from a very young age to learn about essential, what I've come to call advanced practices that have allowed you very obviously to expand your capacity to not only be present in the face of larger and larger stressors, which happens to come in handy right now, but you've actually expanded out a skill set and a number of activated aspects of your presence, so that it's rippled out into your family, into the people in your practice, into your community. It's really been extraordinary learning about your life and what you do and what got you here. I just really thank you for taking time to share about that with me and with us. And I hope this is not our last time. While you've been talking, I've been furiously taking notes about possible future conversations that, personally, I don't know of a more important conversation to be having right now, and ways of building our resilience and possibly transformational resilience, individually and together, to self-regulate, to co-regulate, to come together in a way that I forget exactly how you called it a little while ago, but these are opportunities. These massive global stressors are huge opportunities for us. And for those of us who have done the kind of work that you've clearly done, there's a possibility of being a node, an attracting node to bring together. If it's a family or a neighborhood or a community or a group of immense opportunity. So thank you for spending time with us. Thank you for sharing about your life and what you see and what you do. And I look forward to having hopefully many chapters of this conversation with you.
Okay. Oh, thank you so much for inviting me and for having such this, loose conversation, like with a space to just navigate and go in different directions. Mm-hmm. I'm glad you found it useful for the work you do. I also want to mention that I think it's so important to have this kind of space where we can share, which basically is what we do in community therapy, is what is your experience, what is your experience, what is your experience, and then how these experiences can weave, right. And you kind of do that here in a different setting, in a different way, but with these interviews, I imagine many different experiences that are shared here, and right now we need a lot to be connected and to be hearing each other. So thank you very much for inviting me, and sure, I'll be happy to continue talking at some other time.
Great. Mariano, I'm curious if people wanted to connect with you in some way or find out more about you or I'll do what I can to provide links to some of the things you've mentioned, even if they're in other languages, that's fine. So perhaps, if you wouldn't mind, perhaps you could send a few of those links and I'd be happy to post them. Sure. But in terms of connecting with you, is there a way that people can find out more about you or connect with you in some way?
Yeah. Well, I have a small website that is a work in progress. I'm still, because I had one in Portuguese, I'm building one in English. It's my name, Mariano Pedroza, Pedroza with a Z, .com.br. And I will send you links of the Brazilian Association of Community Therapy, Projeto Quatro Varas, and the trauma work that I do, or the networks I'm connected to. And it's okay to share my email if you want to. People can just connect through email. That's fine as well, which is Mariano Pedroza. You have it.
Yeah.
Gmail.
Great. So again, just really, it's been a joy. I'm so glad when I get to bump into someone who is clearly a resource at scale in their community, in their family, obviously in your own life. It's inspiring. Again, I just can't think of a more important role to play. Not everybody's going to play that role. Not everybody has the same skills that you do and the same interests. We all are going to bring what we bring. But I have a particular attention on those of us who can cultivate resilience in ourselves and, more importantly, in the people around us. And you're clearly one of those people. So Mariano Pedroza, it's just been a pleasure. And I look forward to our next time that we get to talk.
Okay, me too. Thank you, Dean.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.